I never expected Christmas to feel like a performance, but that's exactly what it became the moment my family walked through my front door. I had spent days decorating the house until it looked like something out of a glossy magazine spread, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the right ambiance could stitch old wounds back together. My son, Liam, ran excitedly between the twinkling lights and the presents, blissfully unaware of the tension beneath every polite smile. And despite my own forced grin, something inside me tightened the moment my parents stepped in, their eyes sweeping the room with an expression that felt more evaluative than appreciative. Carol and Leonard, my mom and dad, had always carried a certain air of judgment, but this time it felt heavier, almost purposeful. My mother barely hugged me, offering only a stiff pat on the back before brushing past to greet Liam, her entire demeanor softening unnaturally at the sight of him. My father followed, but his eyes flicked to me with the same old disappointment I had memorized since childhood. Still, I swallowed it, reminding myself that this Christmas was supposed to be different. My sister Emily arrived next, bundled in a red coat and smiling wider than she had in years, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She rushed to Liam with a kind of frantic enthusiasm, hugging him tightly and asking him a dozen questions in a breathless voice. When she finally turned to me, her expression dimmed so noticeably that I felt it like a slap. But before I could ask what was wrong, she stepped around me and busied herself arranging gifts under the tree, avoiding my gaze as if looking at me might trigger something she wasn't ready to face. Then came my brother, Mark, who walked in with his usual swagger but halted mid-step the moment he noticed me watching him. His grin faltered, then reappeared too quickly, like he was trying to pretend the slip never happened. He tousled Liam's hair and greeted him warmly, but when it came time to acknowledge me, the shift in his tone was impossible to ignore. It was colder, stiffer, layered with something unspoken that made my stomach twist. For months leading up to this holiday, I had tried to convince myself that my family's distance was temporary, that maybe we had all just grown apart naturally. But the way they hovered around Liam, orbiting him as if he were the sun and I were barely an asteroid, made it clear that whatever had fractured us ran deeper than time or geography. Every glance exchanged between them came with a silent weight, a shared understanding that seemed to shut me out entirely. And with each passing minute, I felt more like a visitor in my own home. Still, I played the role of gracious host, guiding everyone to the living room and offering them drinks as if nothing felt off. The fireplace crackled warmly, but the atmosphere felt icy and brittle, as though the wrong word could shatter it. Liam sat on the rug showing my mother one of his new dinosaur toys, and I watched her face glow with an affection I had rarely seen directed at my own childhood. The contrast stabbed at something tender inside me. That was when I first noticed the whispering. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it threaded itself through the room in hushed tones whenever they thought I wasn't paying attention. Emily leaned toward my mother with her brow furrowed, and my father shook his head when Mark tried to ask him something quietly. The entire time, their eyes kept drifting toward Liam, never toward me, and with each secretive look, the tension inside my chest constricted like a tightening fist. But things were about to get much worse. I tried to focus on Liam's laughter, the way his small hands moved animatedly as he explained the difference between a tyrannosaurus and a velociraptor. His voice usually soothed me, grounding me in the only relationship I knew was pure and untainted. Yet that day, every sound in the room seemed sharpened my family's clipped whispers. The clinking of glasses, the shifting of bodies trying to appear casual, it all built into a quiet pressure that made me feel like I was missing something crucial just beneath the surface. When we finally sat down for dinner preparations, I caught a moment, just a split second, where Emily looked at me with an expression that wasn't just sad. It was fearful. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then pressed her lips shut and shook her head before walking away. And the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, because I realized she was hiding something she desperately wanted to tell me. That was the moment everything changed. Dinner started under a tense calm, the kind that feels like it's just waiting to snap. My family had somehow perfected the art of appearing polite while letting their judgment drip between the words. My mother passed the mashed potatoes to Liam with a smile so tight it didn't reach her eyes, and I caught a subtle glance from her toward Emily, as if signaling something I wasn't supposed to notice. I forced myself to smile, pushing down the anxiety that had been building since they arrived. But every passing moment made it harder to ignore the strange energy in the room. The aromas of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles felt like a cruel juxtaposition to the icy atmosphere, and I realized this was nothing like the warm, joyful Christmas I had imagined. Mark started telling stories from his childhood, the kind that usually got everyone laughing, but his voice carried a sharp edge tonight. He made small jabs at my parenting decisions, subtle remarks that stung more than outright insults. I tried to laugh along, but Liam noticed my unease and looked up at me with a puzzled frown. I smiled at him, but my heart was pounding. My son's innocence was a stark contrast to the tension suffocating the adults around him, and I felt both protective and helpless. The whispers continued, now paired with occasional glances that froze my stomach. I overheard my mother mutter something about better not telling him yet, and my sister respond, "He has a right to know," before quickly lowering her voice. My chest tightened. The words weren't meant for me, yet they struck like daggers. I had a sinking feeling that whatever they were hiding had to do with Liam, and suddenly, the unease that had been gnawing at me all day crystallized into a sharp, cold fear. I wanted to confront them immediately, but I knew that doing so at the dinner table would explode into chaos. The meal progressed awkwardly, each of us chewing more on silence than on food. Every small sound, the clatter of utensils, Liam's laughter, even the tick of the clock felt amplified in the suffocating tension. I noticed Emily fidgeting with her napkin, avoiding eye contact with anyone, and my father tapping his fingers against the table, as if keeping time with an internal drum of anxiety. Even Mark, who had seemed confident earlier, was quieter now, his usual bravado replaced with a wary alertness. It was as if some unspoken storm had taken hold of the room, and I was powerless to stop it. Then came the question that pierced everything. Liam, in his wide-eyed innocence, looked up at the table and asked, "Mom, why do you never talk about Daddy?" The room froze. My mother's hand stilled mid-motion with her glass of water. Emily's eyes widened, and Mark's fork hovered above his plate like he had suddenly forgotten how to eat. I felt a jolt of panic, my throat tightening as the simple words carried the weight of unspoken truths. For the first time, I saw fear not in myself, but in them. They had spent years keeping something from me, and now Liam had unknowingly pulled the thread. I forced a laugh, hoping to mask the shock and buy time. "We talk about him sometimes, honey," I said softly, but my voice trembled despite my efforts. The way my family glanced at one another, their eyes darting and shifting nervously, made my stomach churn. Something about their behavior was deliberate, calculated, and it terrified me to think how deep the secret ran. Liam, sensing the tension but not understanding it, simply shrugged and returned to his mashed potatoes, his innocence like a small sun in a dark room. After dinner, the tension didn't ease, it metastasized. While Liam ran to play with his new toys, my parents lingered near the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones just out of earshot. I tried to approach them, my voice steady but firm, asking what was going on, but they quickly smiled and changed the subject. Emily wandered past, brushing against me with a look of guilt and sadness that said more than words could. Even Mark avoided eye contact, leaving me to feel like I had been excluded from a crucial part of my own life. By the time dessert was served, the house felt smaller, almost oppressive, and every familiar sound seemed tinted with suspicion. I caught snippets of conversation about keeping it hidden until he's older, and not knowing how she'd react, and my chest tightened so sharply I had to grip the table to steady myself. I realized the secret wasn't just about me, it was about Liam, and suddenly Christmas didn't feel safe or joyous. Every laugh, every clinking glass, every innocent smile from my son became a reminder of the web of lies my family had spun over years. That night, after tucking Liam into bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the fire. The cheerful glow felt like a cruel joke against the gnawing anxiety eating at me. My mind replayed the question, my parents' reactions, the whispered tones, and Emily's fearful expression. One thing was painfully clear. This Christmas wasn't about celebration. It was a reckoning, and I had no idea how far the truth would reach or how devastating it would be. The morning after Christmas, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was holding its breath. Liam ran around the living room with his new train set, blissfully unaware, while my parents and siblings sat stiffly, pretending to watch the holiday cartoons. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I needed answers. I started by approaching Emily in the kitchen, where she was silently sipping her coffee, staring out the window as if hoping the cold gray sky would give her courage. Her hands trembled slightly when she noticed me, and I realized how heavy the secret must have been on her conscience. "Emily," I began, my voice tight but controlled. "I need you to tell me what's going on." She froze, her eyes darting to my parents, who were now quietly reading the newspaper across the room, their posture tense. She shook her head and whispered, "I don't think you're ready." I clenched my fists at my sides, feeling a mix of frustration and fear, but I pressed on. "I am ready. I need to know. It's about Liam, isn't it?" The color drained from her face, and for the first time, I saw her completely vulnerable. She nodded slowly, biting her lip. It's about his father." Her voice was barely audible, trembling like a fragile thread. I felt a shiver run down my spine as my heart began to pound. All the whispers, the strange glances, the avoidance, it had been pointing to this all along. I had suspected something, but the confirmation was sharper, colder, more painful than I could have imagined. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm, though my stomach twisted with dread. Emily took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eyes. "Your parents. They knew the truth from the very beginning. Liam's father. He's not who you think he is." My stomach dropped as the world seemed to tilt around me. The carefully constructed reality I had been living in cracked like thin ice. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, a mix of anger and fear simmering in every syllable. She hesitated, and in that moment, I realized the magnitude of the betrayal. She explained that my parents had discovered something about Liam's biological father years ago, long before I had even known. They had made a choice, cold, calculated, and unforgiving, to keep it from me, supposedly to protect me, or perhaps to control the situation. My mind reeled as I tried to comprehend the betrayal. The years of warmth I had believed I had shared with them, the milestones, the holidays, the conversations, all now tainted by the shadow of their deceit. I felt a surge of anger so intense it made my hands shake. I left Emily in the kitchen and confronted my parents in the living room. Their faces didn't change when I demanded the truth, their expressions carefully neutral, but their eyes betrayed panic. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's fingers fidgeted with the edge of her sweater, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in their composure. They tried to deflect, claiming it was complicated, that they were protecting everyone, but the words rang hollow. I pressed, forcing the truth out of them piece by piece until I finally learned what had been buried for so long. Liam's father was not the man I had once loved, but a man my parents had secretly chosen to shield me from, a man whose existence they had decided I shouldn't know. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Memories of my pregnancy, the time spent worrying about who would be part of our lives, every family interaction suddenly felt like part of an elaborate act I hadn't agreed to participate in. I felt disbelief, then betrayal, then a sorrow so deep it threatened to crush me. My son, innocent and unaware, was at the center of a web of lies spun by the people I had trusted most. I couldn't look at them without seeing their duplicity, their careful manipulation, and the weight of their decisions pressed down on me like a physical force. I retreated to Liam's room, needing to see him, to ground myself in something real, something untainted by the lies. He was sitting on the floor, building a tower of blocks, humming to himself. The simplicity of his joy was a stark contrast to the storm raging in my heart. I knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, and for a moment, I let myself breathe in his innocence, the only thing in my life that remained untouched by betrayal. But even as I held him, I knew I couldn't let it end there. The secret my family had kept for so long demanded confrontation, accountability, and action. Their deception had shaped our lives in ways I was only beginning to understand. and the holiday that had started with cheer had become a crucible of truth and betrayal. I realized that by the end of Christmas, nothing would ever be the same. And I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. I was done pretending that their version of reality could exist unchallenged. By the time Christmas night arrived, the house felt like a pressure cooker, each room heavy with unspoken tension. I had spent the afternoon rehearsing what I would say, pacing the living room while Liam played quietly, blissfully unaware that the walls around him were closing in. My parents and siblings sat in the lounge, pretending to watch a holiday movie, though the flickering images of dancing lights reflected in their eyes only highlighted the nervous energy pulsing beneath their composed facades. I could smell the faint scent of cinnamon and pine, but it no longer brought warmth. It was suffocating, mingling with the bitterness of betrayal. The calm I had tried to maintain all day was crumbling, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I gathered my courage and called everyone to the living room, my voice firm but edged with tension. Liam's head popped up, curious, and I felt a pang of guilt for dragging him into this storm. My parents exchanged a quick glance, their expressions tight, and Emily's eyes pleaded silently for restraint, though I could see the same fear mirrored in Mark. I took a deep breath, my palms sweating, and started to speak, recounting the fragments of truth I had uncovered earlier in the day. The air felt electric, every creak of the floorboards and snap of a fire log amplifying the weight of the moment. "They've been keeping something from me. From us," I began, my voice rising slightly as I tried to steady my emotions. "Something about Liam's father. Something that affects everything we've ever known." My father's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the arm of his chair. My mother's face went pale, her hands fidgeting in her lap as she avoided my gaze. Emily bit her lip, and Mark's usual swagger had completely vanished, replaced by a rigid posture that betrayed anxiety. The room was silent, but the tension roared louder than any words. I continued, detailing the whispered conversations I had overheard, the evasions, the half-truths, and Emily's confession. Each revelation landed like a hammer blow, shattering the carefully curated illusion my family had maintained for years. I could see the guilt and panic ripple across their faces, and for the first time, I realized just how calculated the deception had been. The warmth of Christmas lights and music was gone, replaced with a raw, exposed truth that left everyone vulnerable. And yet I couldn't stop. I had to finish what I started, even if it meant breaking every bond I thought I still had. My father finally spoke, his voice low and strained, attempting to justify his actions. "We were trying to protect you," he said, the words tasting bitter even as they left his mouth. "We didn't want you to worry, to be hurt." I laughed bitterly, a sound that startled even me. "Protect me? Or protect yourselves?" I demanded, my anger spilling over. "You made decisions about my life, about Liam's life, behind my back, every moment, every choice. You robbed me of the truth." The room went utterly silent again, the weight of the accusation hanging in the air like smoke. Emily, tears welling in her eyes, finally spoke. "I tried to tell you, but they wouldn't let me. I didn't know how," she whispered. Her vulnerability pierced the tension briefly, but it only made the betrayal feel more acute. Mark, silent until now, stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I didn't want to be part of this lie either," he admitted, but his words carried no comfort, only more fracture lines in the family's already shattered foundation. I glanced at Liam, who was watching the adults with a quiet intensity that made my heart ache. He didn't fully understand, but he could feel the tension, the sharp edge in everyone's voices, and his small hands clutched the edge of the rug as if bracing for impact. I realized that this confrontation wasn't just about my anger or betrayal, it was about protecting him, about making sure he would know the truth from me, unfiltered, without the interference of years of lies. The final twist was looming, unspoken but palpable. I held a folder of documents and letters I had found tucked away in a drawer earlier that day, proof that could not be ignored or denied. The silence stretched taut, each heartbeat echoing in my ears, as I prepared to lay bare the evidence of their deception. Every glance, every shiver of guilt, every strained breath told me the moment was ripe for revelation. This was the moment everything changed. I took a deep breath, holding the folder tightly as I stepped into the center of the living room, where my family now sat stiffly, every eye fixed on me. The documents inside weren't just paper, they were the years of lies, hidden letters, and legal papers my parents had buried to manipulate the narrative of Liam's life. I felt a mix of fear, anger, and a strange exhilaration at the thought of finally exposing them. Liam, sitting cross-legged on the rug with wide eyes, didn't fully understand, but he sensed the intensity of the moment and stayed close to me, his small hands slipping into mine. I knew I had to do this carefully, but firmly there was no turning back. "I have everything," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Every letter, every note, every conversation you tried to hide. You kept the truth from me and from Liam for years." My mother's face went pale, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap, while my father's jaw clenched so tightly I feared it might break. Emily's eyes were brimming with tears, and Mark looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. I could see the weight of their deception finally settling on them, and for the first time, I felt a small, vindicating relief. I opened the folder and began laying out the evidence, piece by piece. There were letters between my parents and a lawyer discussing Liam's father. Notes about what information to withhold from me, and even documentation that proved they had actively manipulated circumstances to keep me in the dark. Each page I revealed was like a hammer striking their carefully constructed facade, and I could see the cracks widen in real time. My parents' calm composure had completely dissolved, replaced by panic, shame, and a desperate attempt to explain themselves. "You thought you were protecting me," I said, my voice rising. "But all you did was control me. You lied to my face. You lied to Liam. And you treated me like I wasn't capable of handling the truth." The room was silent, except for the quiet whimpering from my mother and the soft shuffle of papers as Mark fidgeted nervously. Emily whispered something, but I didn't hear it over the racing of my own heart. I had lived with the shadow of this betrayal for years, and now it was time to shine a light so bright that it could not be ignored. My father tried to speak, to defend himself, but the words faltered, hollow against the weight of evidence. "We thought it was best," he began, but I cut him off sharply. "Best for whom? Not me. Not Liam. This was for your own comfort, your own sense of control." Tears streamed down my face, not just from anger, but from the sheer exhaustion of years of manipulation finally coming to a head. Liam, sensing my distress, crawled into my lap, pressing his small body against me, his presence a grounding force in the chaos. Then, finally, I turned to Liam and explained as gently as I could that his father was not the man he had been told about, that my parents had kept a secret, and that the truth was his to know now. I watched his face carefully, noticing the confusion, the questions forming in his eyes, but also the trust he placed in me. In that moment, I felt a surge of protective clarity. I would shield him from the deceit that had poisoned my own life, and I would ensure he knew the truth on his terms. My parents could no longer interfere, no matter how much they wished to. The fallout was immediate. My parents sat in stunned silence, the reality of their choices weighing heavily on them. Emily clung to me, sobbing quietly, relieved that I finally understood, while Mark simply avoided my gaze, unable to reconcile his own involvement. I felt a strange sense of triumph, not in cruelty, but in justice. They had tried to manipulate our lives, and now the consequences were inescapable. Karma had arrived quietly, like a winter storm, leaving the world cold and exposed, but fair. By the time the evening drew to a close, the house felt both emptier and freer. Liam and I retreated to his room, where we built towers and read stories by the glow of his small lamp. The warmth returned, not from candles or pine, but from the knowledge that I had reclaimed our truth, that the lies could no longer shadow our lives. I held him close, feeling his heartbeat against mine, and understood that despite the chaos, we had survived and we would thrive. As I looked back at the living room from the doorway, I realized the Christmas we had imagined would never exist. The illusions were gone, replaced by honesty and a fragile, hard-earned peace. My family would never be the same, and I didn't want them to be. But Liam and I had each other, and for the first time in years, that was enough. The secret was out, The lies were shattered, and finally, we could breathe.